There's a certain hour on the high desert, that thin, blue hour before the sun breaks the ridgeline, when a man alone starts to believe he's the last living thing for 100 miles. I believed that for 6 years. I had my cattle, my broken watch, and my silence, and I'd made a kind of peace with all three. Then one morning in that blue hour, something crawled up my porch steps that changed the arithmetic of my whole life. I'm going to tell you what happened next, how a woman I'd never met reached my door with the last strength in her body, and how a promise I made without thinking cost me almost everything I owned and nearly the breath in my lungs. I'll tell you about the men who came looking for her. I'll tell you about the choice I had to make in the dark, the one I still turn over at night like a stone in my pocket. But before you decide whether an old rancher's word is worth your time, understand this. I am not a brave man. I want that clear from the start. Everything I did afraid. If you've ever been afraid and done the right thing anyway, or wished you had, then stay with me. This one's for you. The first thing I heard wasn't a knock. It was a sound a body makes when it's out of ways to hold itself up, a soft, boneless thump against the boards, like a sack of feed sliding off a wagon. I was at the stove with the coffee not yet boiled, and I'd learned a long time ago that the desert doesn't make sounds without a reason. A man learns to sort them. Wind has its voice and coyotes theirs and cattle another, and there's a whole language of ordinary things, the tick of the roof cooling, the settle of the well rope. This was none of those. This was weight, living weight gone slack. I set the pot off the heat and took the shotgun down from the 2 nails over the door, and I want you to know I did it slow. Not brave slow. Scared slow, the kind where your hands do the job and the rest of you argues about it. When I opened the door, the blue hour was just starting to yellow at the edges, and there was a woman lying half across my top step with one arm still reaching toward the door she'd never made it to. I've turned that picture over 1,000 times since, the reaching arm. She'd come all that way. I didn't know how far yet, only that it was far because nobody was near me, nobody at all. And her body had quit maybe 18 inches short of the door. And still that arm was out, fingers open, like her want had outlasted her strength by just that little bit, and had to lie down separate from the rest of her. She was Apache. I knew that the way you know weather before you can name any single sign of it. Her dress was a woman's dress, deerskin gone dark with hard use, and there was a wound high on her shoulder that had bled through and dried and bled again, and her feet were bare and ruined. Not a girl. A woman grown, maybe 5 and 30, maybe more, with a face that even half dead had a set to it, a kind of refusal. I stood there like a fool with a shotgun I had no earthly use for, and I did the thing I always do when my mind won't move. I reached into my vest and took out the watch and wound it. 3 turns. It's never worked, not since I've owned it. The hands sit at 4 minutes past 10, and they've sat there through everything. But the winding gives my fingers somewhere to be, and God help me, I stood over a dying woman on my own porch and wound a dead watch like it was going to tell me what to do. Then her lips moved. I didn't hear it the first time. I got down on my knees, my bad one popped like it always does, and I leaned in, and she said it again, so quiet it was barely more than breath shaped into a corner of a word. Behind. That was all. But she said it looking past me, out toward the ridge, and I understood her before I understood her. She wasn't asking for water. She wasn't asking to be saved. With the last thing she had, she was warning me. Men were behind her. I got her inside. I don't remember the deciding of it, only the doing, my arms under her, the terrible lightness of her, which is a thing that will break your heart, how light a person gets when they've been running long enough. She weighed like a girl. She weighed like someone who'd been giving her body away to distance for days. I put her on my own bed because it was the only bed, and I put the shotgun where I could reach it, and I stood in the middle of my one room with my heart going like a spooked colt, and I made myself think. Behind, how far behind? On horses or on foot, how many? I went to the window that looks east, and I stood off to the side of it the way you learn to, and I watched the ridge come out of the dark. For a long while there was nothing but the land doing what it always does, waking up gray and gold. My cattle were a smear of dark shapes down in the bottoms. My one good horse, Juniper, stamped in the corral, catching the smell of blood off the woman and not liking it. Then up on the ridge a shape, then another beside it, then a third. 3 riders, holding still against the brightening sky, looking down at my place the way buzzards look at something that isn't dead yet but will be. Let me tell you who I was before, so you understand what a poor candidate I was for any of this. My name is Elias Crome. Most everyone who ever bothered called me Eli. I'd had a wife once named Sarah and a boy who came too early and didn't stay, and then a fever took Sarah 2 winters after that, out here where the nearest doctor was a 2-day ride and arrived only in time to tell me what I already knew. I buried them both up on the little rise behind the house where the yucca grows, and after that I stopped talking much, because there wasn't anybody to talk to, and I found I didn't miss the sound of my own voice. 6 years I ran cattle alone. I was good at it, and it was the only thing I was good at. I owed money to a bank in Sonora Wells and paid it down slow. I saw people maybe 4 times a year when I drove beeves to the railhead or bought supplies, and those people mostly found me strange and left me be, which suited us both. The watch was Sarah's father's. It came to me by way of her, and it never ran the whole time I had it, and I wound it anyway. She used to laugh at me for that. "You know it's broke, Eli." I knew. I wound it still. After she was gone, I found I couldn't stop, and I didn't try. A man is allowed one foolishness. That was mine. So there I was, a quiet, cattle-poor widower with a dead watch and a bad knee. And there was a hunted woman bleeding on my bed and 3 armed men on my ridge. And not one thing in my life had prepared me for what I was supposed to do about any of it. The riders came down slow. That's a thing I've noticed about men who mean harm and aren't in a hurry. They take their time, because time is a way of telling you they own the situation. They came down off the ridge and across my bottoms, walking their horses, and I watched them scatter my cattle without care. And by the time they were near enough to see faces, the sun was full up, and the woman behind me had started to shiver hard even though the room wasn't cold. I'd put a blanket on her and pressed a folded shirt against her shoulder, and she'd gripped my wrist once, hard, her eyes coming open and fixing on me with a question in them that I couldn't answer because I didn't know the answer myself. Then she'd gone under again. I went out onto the porch. I did not take the shotgun. I want to be honest about my thinking there because it wasn't courage. It was arithmetic. 3 men, 3 guns, one of me. If I came out armed, it became a killing right off, and a killing I'd lose. Unarmed, there was still a chance it stayed words. Words I could maybe do something with. So I left the gun inside the door where I could get to it, and I came out with my hands empty and my heart in my throat, and I leaned on the post like a man with all the time in the world. They stopped their horses in my yard. The lead one was heavy-set, older, with a gray-shot beard and a good coat, the kind of man who gives orders and has them followed. The other 2 were younger, harder used, the kind you hire. One of them had a rifle laid across his saddle bow, not pointed at anything yet, which is its own kind of pointing. "Morning," the lead man said, friendly as church. "Morning," I said. "You'd be the fella runs this outfit." "I would." He looked around, taking in my poor place, the leaning barn, the corral, the house that needed paint it would never get. "Lonesome spot." "Suits me." "I'll bet it does," he smiled. He had good teeth for a frontier man, and I mistrusted them. "Name's Harlan Deacon. These are my men. We're tracking a woman, Apache. She's done some harm up north, killed a man, and there's a matter of justice in it. We tracked her this way." "You seen anything?" Now here is where I want to slow down and tell you the truth of what happened inside me, because the outside of it was just a man leaning on a post, saying nothing yet. But the inside of it was the whole rest of my life deciding itself. I had in that one moment a clear and easy road. All I had to do was say, "She's inside, come take her," and these 3 would ride off with their trouble and leave me my quiet, my cattle, my dead watch, my 2 graves on the rise. I owed the woman nothing. I didn't know her. She was a stranger who'd bled on my sheets. Deacon was offering me the one thing I'd built my whole small life around, which was to be left alone. And I thought about her arm, reaching. 18 inches short of a door, she didn't know had a man behind it who could help her, reaching anyway. And I thought, this is the shameful, honest part. I thought about Sarah, and the 2-day ride, and the doctor who came too late, and how there had been nobody, in the whole wide, indifferent country to reach a hand toward her when it would have counted. And something in me that I'd kept packed down tight for 6 years came loose and stood up. "Haven't seen anybody," I said. Deacon's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. They went to the porch boards by the door where, God help me, I hadn't thought of it. There was a smear of blood, dark and unmistakable, where I'd carried her across. He looked at it a good long while, then he looked at me. "That's a lot of blood for a man ain't seen anybody," he said, gentle as anything. My mouth was dry as ash. The shotgun was 6 feet behind me through the door. I would not reach it in time, and we all knew it, and the rifle across the young one's saddle had come up just slightly, just enough. Slaughtered a hog day before yesterday, I said. Hung it right there off the porch beam. Blood gets everywhere. You want to see the hide, it's salting in the barn. I don't know where the lie came from. It came up out of me smooth and whole like it had been waiting years for its turn. And here's the thing about a lie, which I learned that morning at the age of 41. A good one isn't about the words. It's about whether you'll walk toward it. So I pushed off the post and I said, "Come on, I'll show you." And I started toward the barn like a man with nothing to hide. And I did not look back, and the not looking back was the whole of it, because a man protecting something looks back, and I didn't, and Deacon, who read men for a living, watched me walk and had to weigh it. He didn't come see the hide, but he didn't call me a liar either. He sat his horse and he watched me get halfway to the barn, and then he said, "Chrome." I stopped, turned. "That's my name, I didn't give it to you." Sonora Wells knows it. Man asks around. He leaned on his saddle horn. "I'll tell you plain, since you seem a plain sort. That woman's worth money to me. Bounty on Apache trouble, paid by the county, paid good. I've tracked her 4 days and I'm owed. If I find she came through here and you sent me wrong, I'll come back, and it won't be to talk about hogs." He straightened. "But I'm a fair man, so I'll say this once. You send her out or you send us word where she's gone, and there's $50 in it for you and no hard feelings, and you go on being the lonesome fella who runs this outfit." $50. That was near a third of what I owed the bank. That was a real number in my real life, and he watched my face to see it land. "I'll keep an eye out," I said. He nodded slow, like we'd concluded some business. Then he turned his horse, and his men turned theirs, and they rode back the way they'd come, unhurried, scattering my cattle a second time out of pure meanness, up over the ridge and gone. I stood in my yard a long time after they were out of sight. My legs had a shake in them, I couldn't stop. I took out the watch and wound it 3 turns, and the hands sat at 10:04, same as ever, and I thought, "You have just made the worst mistake of your life, Elias Chrome," and under that thought, quieter, another one, and the first true thing you've done in 6 years. She woke a little past noon. I'd cleaned the wound as best I knew, which wasn't much. I knew cattle. I knew how to sew a torn hide and pack a wound with what I had, and I'd got some water into her a spoon at a time, and broth after, and her shivering had eased. When her eyes came open, they were clear, and they went first to the window, then to the door, then to me, in that order, and I understood the order. Escape first, threat second. The man third, and last, because in her experience men were rarely the least of the dangers in a room. "They're gone," I said. 3 of them rode north. There was a heavy-set one called Deacon. Something crossed her face at the name. She knew it. Her hand moved to her shoulder and found it bound, and she looked at the binding, then at me. And I saw her doing the same arithmetic I'd done on the porch, trying to work out what I wanted, because everyone wants something, and the wanting is usually the trap. I told him I hadn't seen anybody, I said. "I don't know why I lied, but I did, so you're safe here for a little if you want a rest. There's broth, there's water." I stood up because I'd learned that looming makes a person feel cornered, and I moved to the far side of the room and busied my hands with nothing so she'd have space. "I'm Eli," I said to the wall more than to her. "This is my place. I run cattle. There's nobody else here." "Hasn't been for 6 years. Behind me, after a long silence, a voice, rough with disuse and pain but steady. "Why did you lie?" I turned around. She was watching me with those clear, refusing eyes. "I don't rightly know," I said. And then, because she'd asked me plain and I felt she'd earned plain back, my wife died out here. There wasn't anybody near to help. I've thought a long time about how that was. I guess when I saw you reaching for my door, I couldn't stand to be one more nobody near. I felt my face heat. I'm not a man who says things. That's the truth. It's the only one I've got. She looked at me for what felt like a year. Whatever she was searching for, she must have found some of it, because the set of her shoulders changed by a degree. "Nolan," she said. "My name." "Nolan," I said, careful with it. "The man Deacon speaks of a killing." Her jaw tightened. "There was a killing, it was not mine." She stopped, and I watched her decide how much to spend on me because words cost her strength she didn't have to spare. "His men killed my brother's son, a boy, 14 winters, for nothing, for being where they wanted to dig. I saw it. That is my crime. I saw it, and they cannot have a witness." Her eyes did not water. They went hard and dry as the country outside. "So now the killing is called mine, and there is money for my body, and they will not stop. You understand? They will not stop. You have brought them onto your own ground, Eli. You should have let me lie." And there it was. the size of the thing I'd stepped into, laid out plain on my own bed by a woman who'd have rather I'd left her to die than dragged me down with her. I thought about it. I gave it the honest weight it deserved. Then I did the second foolish thing of that long day, and it was worse than the first, because the first I could blame on surprise, and this one I did with my eyes open. I went and got the watch, and I set it on the table between us where she could see it, the dead thing with its hands at 10:04. "This doesn't run," I said. "Belonged to my wife's father. I wind it every day anyway. She used to laugh at me for it." I looked at Nolan. "A man told me once you can't fix a thing that's already stopped. I've been proving him wrong every morning for 6 years, near as I can tell." I don't know if she understood what I was reaching for. I barely understood it myself. "You're not going out that door for them to find. Not while you can't run, that's all. You rest. I'll watch the ridge." She didn't thank me. I was glad of it. A thank. You would have made it smaller than it was. She only looked at the watch a while, and then at me, and something moved behind her face that I would spend the next many days learning to read. "They will come back," she said. "I know it. 3 of them, more if Deacon sends for more. You are one man." "I know that too." She closed her eyes. I thought she'd gone back under. But at the edge of sleep she said one more thing, so low I almost missed it, and it stayed with me long after the rest of that day had blurred. "You should be more afraid than you are." The trouble was, I wasn't less afraid. I was plenty afraid. I just found at 41 on a lonesome ranch at the far edge of everything that there are things a man can be more afraid of than dying, and being nobody near one more time while somebody reached was one of them. That evening I did the chores I always did, because a place doesn't stop needing tending just because your life has changed shape. I watered juniper and forked hay and walked the near fence, and the whole time I watched the ridgeline, and the whole time I turned the day over. $50. He'd said it easy, but Deacon was not an easy man, and the offer had teeth in it. He'd be back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe when the wound in Nolan's story had time to heal into certainty in his mind. And when he came, he'd come sure, and he'd come with more than 3. I stood at Sarah's grave in the last light, like I did most evenings, and I told her about it, the way I'd got in the habit of telling her things nobody living heard. "Got myself into a fix," I said to the mounded earth and the yucca. "Lied to a bounty man, took in a woman he wants dead." I turned the watch in my fingers. "You'd have done the same, don't pretend you wouldn't. You'd have had her inside before I finished thinking about it." I was quiet a while. The stars were coming out hard and bright the way they do out here where there's no other light to argue with them. "I don't know how this ends, Sarah. I don't think it ends good. But I couldn't be one more nobody. I couldn't, not again." The grave didn't answer. They never do. But saying it out loud settled something, and I went back down to the house where a hunted woman slept in my bed, and a dead watch sat on my table, and I banked the fire low, and I sat up in the chair by the window with the shotgun across my knees, watching the ridge go black against the stars. Somewhere in the deep of that night, Nolan spoke from the dark, and I hadn't known she was awake. "Eli, I'm here." A pause, then careful, like she was setting down something she'd carried a long way. "The boy. My brother's son. His name was Closen. He was fast, faster than the grown men, and it made him proud, and I told him pride would be the end of him." Her voice did something in the dark that faces do in light. I was right, but not the way I meant. I didn't say anything. Some griefs don't want answering. They just want a witness, and hadn't that been her whole crime, being a witness? So I gave her the only thing I had, which was to stay awake and listen and not look away, and let her lay it down. "When they came," she said, "he ran. He was so fast, Eli. I thought he will outrun them. He always outruns everyone. But a horse is faster than a boy. I did not know that a horse is faster than a proud boy." The dark held very still. I watched from the rocks. I could do nothing. And after, when they were gone, I went down and I held him, and I made a promise over his body that they would answer for it. That is why I did not die on the trail, though my body wanted to. A promise will carry you past where your legs give out. It carried me to your porch. She reached his porch with her last strength. Now you know what the strength was made of. Not muscle. A promise over a boy named Closen, faster than the grown men, brought down because a horse is faster than a proud child. "I'll help you keep it," I said into the dark, and I meant it. And I had no idea in the world how, and I was so afraid I could taste it like a penny on my tongue. "You are a strange man, Eli Crome," she said. "So I've been told." "Wind your dead watch," she said, and I heard for the first time something in her voice that might one day be the far-off cousin of a smile. "Perhaps tomorrow the hands will move." They didn't, of course, they never had. 4 minutes past 10 through everything. But I wound it anyway, 3 turns in the dark, and out past the black ridge the country held its breath, and somewhere north of us Harlan Deacon was sleeping sure of himself, and did not yet know that the lonesome fella who ran the poor outfit had, after 6 years of being nothing to nobody, decided to become something very inconvenient indeed. I should have been more afraid than I was. She was right about that. She was right about a great many things, and wrong about only one, and the one. 3 days went by before Deacon came back, and those 3 days were the strangest peace I ever knew. I say strange because it wasn't a real peace and both of us knew it. It was the kind you get in the eye of a thing, where the wind drops and the birds fool themselves into singing, and you go about your business knowing the second wall of the storm is coming, and it's always worse than the first. But even a false peace has real hours in it, and I've come to think those hours were among the truest I've spent on this earth, so I'll tell them before I tell the wall that came after. Nolan got stronger fast. Faster than any wound of that size should allow. I'd sewn plenty of torn flesh, cattle mostly, and I know how slow the body is about mending. But she had a will in her that pulled the healing along like a mule pulling a stuck wagon, sheer refusal doing the work that rest was supposed to. By the second day she was sitting up. By the third she was on her feet, one hand braced on the wall, walking my one room end to make her legs remember, gray with the pain of it and not stopping. "You'll tear the stitches," I told her. "Then I will sew them again," she said, and kept walking. I gave up telling her things after that. I'm a slow learner, but I do learn. We didn't talk a great deal. She wasn't a woman for filling silence, and neither was I, and it turned out 2 people who don't need to fill silence can share a small house better than you'd think. She watched me a lot, watched how I did things, the order of my chores, where I kept the shells, how I favored my bad knee. I understood it wasn't rudeness. It was survival. She was learning the ground the way you learn ground you might have to fight or flee across. I'd have done the same in her place. The second evening she surprised me. I came in from the corral and she'd made food. She'd found my few poor stores and done something to the beans and cornmeal that I hadn't the skill to do. And there was a plant she'd sent me to pull from the wash that morning without telling me why, and it turned out to be the why. It was the first meal in 6 years I hadn't cooked for myself, and I sat there over it like a dumb animal, and something climbed up in my throat that I had to look at the wall to master. "It is only food," she said, watching me. "I know it. You look at it like it is more." "It's been a while," was all I could manage, "since a thing was made in this house by somebody who wasn't just me." She let that sit. She was good at letting things sit. Then she said, "In my brother's camp there was always someone. You do not know how loud a person's own quiet can get until it is the only sound for years." She looked at me across the little table, across the dead watch that lived there now like a third thing at every meal. "I think you know." "I know," I said. That was as near as we came, those 3 days, to speaking the thing plainly, the thing that we were 2 people whom the world had emptied out, hers by murder and mine by fever and hard luck, and that some accident of a bleeding morning had set us across a table from each other, and that it was, in the middle of terror, not unwelcome. We didn't say it. We didn't need to. She'd already told me you don't fill a silence when the silence is saying it for you. On the 3rd day I had to make a choice I'd been putting off, and it was this. I was low on shells, low on flour, low on the salt I'd need if this went the way I feared, and the only cure was a ride to Sonora Wells, half a day out and half a day back. Deacon had said the town knew my name. That meant the town might know his business too, and a man riding in for shells the same week a bounty woman went missing was a man drawing eyes. But you can't fight a siege you've no powder for, so I told Nolan I had to go. She didn't like it, not because she feared being left. I think being left alone was a thing she was more comfortable with than I was, but because a ride to town was a thread that could be pulled. "If they see you," she said, "they will read you. Deacon reads men. You are not a man who lies well over time. You lied once on your porch from your gut. That is different from lying to a town for a day." She was right, and it stung, and I've noticed the things that sting are mostly the true ones. "What will you say if a man asks after the woman?" "That I haven't seen her." "And your face when you say it." I didn't have an answer. I'd never been asked to school my face before. Out here there's no one to school it for. So she taught me. It sounds a small thing, and it wasn't. She sat me down and she made me say the lie over and over, haven't seen anybody, been out at my place same as always, and each time she'd watch and tell me flat where my face betrayed me. The eyes going up and left, the swallow before the word woman, the hand that wanted the watch. Wind it now, she said. Here, get it out of your hand. In town, if your hand goes to the watch when they ask, they will follow your hand. A liar's tell is not the lie. It is the thing his body does around the lie. She drilled me till the sun was high. By the end, I could say it clean. I don't know that I've ever learned anything faster or hated learning anything more, because what I was learning was how to be someone I'd never wanted to be. You are a better liar now, she said when she was satisfied. Doesn't feel like something to be proud of. It is not pride, it is a tool. A knife is not proud, you will need the knife. She handed me my hat. Go, come back before dark. If you are not back by full dark, I will be gone, and you will not find me, and that is how it must be, so do not be late for my sake. I rode out with that hanging over me, and it kept me honest about my hurry. Sonora Wells was the same sun-bleached string of buildings it always was, the mercantile, the assay office, the 2 saloons, the church that doubled as everything, the little bank that held the paper on my land. I'd been coming there for 11 years, and it had never once felt like anything but a chore. That day it felt like walking a cattle chute with the gate men I couldn't see. I did my business slow and ordinary. Flour, salt, coffee, and the shells last, and not too many shells, because a man buying a case of shells is a man expecting trouble, and I wanted to be a man expecting nothing. Old Pettigrew, who ran the mercantile, talked at me the way he always did, weather and cattle prices and who'd died, and I gave him back the same grunts I always gave, and my hands stayed off the watch, and I thought I was doing fine. Then a man came in behind me that I knew by the coat before I turned. Not Deacon, one of the young ones, the rifle across the saddle one, though he'd left the rifle outside. Up close he was younger than I'd read him on the ridge, maybe 22, with a raw, sun-peeled face and eyes that hadn't yet learned to hide what was behind them. That was a mercy for me, and I knew it. The older a hard man gets, the smoother his face, and this one still wore his thoughts on the outside. He'd followed me in, or he'd been in town and seen my horse. Either way, he came to the counter and made a show of looking at goods, and then he said, not to me exactly, to the room, "Chrome, ain't it?" "That's my name. Mr. Deacon sends regards." He picked up a tin of something and turned it in his hands and set it down. "Says to tell you the offer stands, 50. Says to tell you it won't stand long." "Tell him I'm obliged," I said, "but I've got nothing to sell him. Haven't seen anybody out my way but cattle." And I felt my eyes want to go up and left, and I held them level on the tins behind Pettigrew's head, and I did not swallow, and my hand wanted the watch so bad it ached, and I set it flat on the counter instead and kept it there. A liar's tell is not the lie. It is the thing his body does around the lie. I gave my body nothing to do. The boy looked at me a while. Then he did a thing that I didn't understand until later, and when I understood it, it changed how I saw the whole business. He looked at me, really looked, and something crossed his raw young face, something like a question he was asking himself and didn't want the answer to. "You know what she done?" he asked, and there was a strange note under it, not a threat. Almost a plea, like he wanted me to tell him something that would make his own days easier. "I hear she killed a man," I said carefully, "up north." "That's what's said." He looked down at the counter. "That's what's paid for anyhow." And then low so Pettigrew wouldn't catch it. "There was a boy up there before, I want you to know I didn't," he stopped. His jaw worked. Whatever he'd started to confess, he swallowed it back down, and when he looked up his face had closed over it, learning smoothness right there in front of me, growing his hard man's mask a year in a second. $50, Chrome, won't stand long." And he walked out. I stood at that counter with my heart going and my hand flat and cold on the wood, and I understood that I had just met a man who'd been there when closin' was run down, a man young enough to still be sick over it, old enough to keep writing for the men who'd done it. And I thought, there's the crack. Every wall Deacon had, that boy was the crack in it. I filed it away. I didn't yet know what I'd do with it. But out here you learn to save every scrap that might one day be a tool, the way you save baling wire and bent nails. And I saved that boy's sick young face against a need I couldn't yet see. I got my goods and got my horse and got out of Sonora Wells before the sun was more than a hand past noon, and I made it back to my place with light to spare, and Nolan was still there, standing off the corner of the window the way I'd taught myself to stand, watching me come. "You are early," she said. Learned from a good teacher. Your face held. It held, I swung down. But I've got things to tell you. There's a boy rides for Deacon. He was there when closin' he was there, and it's eating him. Something went very still in Nolan's face. Describe him. I did. The rawness, the peeling sunburn, the eyes that hadn't learned to lie yet. She was quiet a long moment. Then she said a thing that took the ground out from under me. That is the one who did not shoot. What? There were 4 that day, 3 fired, 1 did not. Her voice was flat and terrible and even. I saw it from the rocks. 3 raised their guns and 1 turned his horse away and would not. Deacon struck him for it. I saw the blow. I did not know if the one who turned away would be a mercy or only a witness like me, too afraid to matter. She looked at me. He is here. He is still riding with them, so he chose. He chose the money and the men over the boy he would not shoot. Her jaw set. That is worse, Eli. To know the wrong of a thing and do it anyway is worse than never knowing. Do not save your kindness for that one. He has already spent his. I didn't argue, but I didn't quite believe her either, and I want to be honest that my not believing wasn't wisdom. It was hope, which is a different thing and often a more foolish one. I'd looked in that boy's face and seen a man drowning, and I'd been a man drowning, and I couldn't make myself write him off entire. I put it away with the rest of my saved scraps, and I said nothing, and that saying nothing would matter later more than I could have guessed. That night the false peace ended. I was at the window past midnight. I'd taken to sleeping in the chair and letting Nolan have the bed over her objection, and I'd won that one argument by the simple means of refusing to discuss it, when I saw a light up on the ridge. Not a star. A moving light. A torch or a lantern swung, and then it was gone, and then it came again, farther along the ridgeline, and I understood I was being shown it on purpose. Deacon wanted me to know he was there. He wanted me to spend the night knowing. I woke Nolan with a hand on her good shoulder, and she came awake all at once, no grogginess, straight from sleep to ready, which told me more about her years than any story could. I pointed. She looked. She counted the times the light came and went, the spacing of it, and she said, "More than 3. That is 2 men signaling each other. Deacon has brought others." "How many, you figure?" "I cannot know from a light, but he would not come back with only what he had. He came back with enough to be sure." She was already moving, pulling on the moccasins I'd cut down a pair of my old boots to make for her ruined feet. "He will not come tonight. Tonight is the light. Tonight is to make you afraid, to make you sleepless, so tomorrow you are slow. He will come in the day when he can see, when a man defending a house has nowhere the dark can hide him." She looked at me. "You have until light to decide something, Eli, and I will say it once and not shame you by saying it twice. You can still put me out. I can go west into the rocks tonight while they watch the ridge to the east. I am strong enough now to run again. If I am gone before the day, they have no cause to burn your house or kill you. Your lie becomes a thing they cannot prove. You go back to your cattle and your graves and your dead watch, and you live." She said it steady, no plea in it, laying it out like a fair trade. "That is the wise thing. I am telling you the wise thing because you saved my life, and I owe you the wise thing." And there it was again, the road out, offered a second time by her own mouth at cost to herself. I thought about it. I made myself think about it honest, because a choice you don't examine isn't worth the making. I thought about my cattle scattered and shot, my house burned, myself dead on my own porch where she'd nearly died on hers. I thought about how not one soul in the world would blame me for putting a stranger out into the dark to save my own life and land. I thought about Sarah and the 2 graves and the yucca, and how a man's got a right to what little he's clawed together. Then I went and got the watch off the table, and I wound it 3 turns, standing at the black window with the ridge light coming and going, and I said, "No." "Eli." I said no. I turned around. "You want the wise thing, I'll give you the wise thing since you've been so generous with it. The wise thing is I'm one man against however many, and I'll likely lose, and knowing that, I'm still not putting you out into the dark to be run down like your nephew was, because if I do that I'm no different from that boy in the mercantile who turned his horse away and rode on anyhow. I'd be a man who knew the wrong of a thing and did it. You told me that's the worst kind. Well, I've been listening." My voice wasn't as steady as I wanted. "So here's what we're going to do instead of the wise thing. We're going to be smart. There's a difference. Wise is you run and I fold. Smart is we don't fight the fight he wants." Something moved in her face that I hadn't seen there before. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of something warmer that surprise makes room for. "You have a plan." "I've got the start of one." And I did, and it had come to me at that black window with the watch in my hand, and it hung on 2 things, the lay of my own land, which I knew better than any tracker Deacon could hire, and a raw-faced boy who hadn't yet finished spending his kindness, whatever Nolan believed. But it needs the dark, and it needs the both of us, and it needs you to trust me past where it's comfortable. Can you do that? She looked at me a long moment. Then she came across the room, slow, favoring her shoulder, and she stood close in front of me, closer than we'd stood, and she reached up and put 2 fingers against the side of my face. Not soft, exactly, but sure, the way you'd touch a thing to know it was real. I have not trusted a man past comfortable in a long time, she said. The last time it was my brother, and he is dead, and I am the last of what we were. Her fingers stayed on my face. But you wound a broken watch every morning because you cannot bear to give up on a stopped thing. Perhaps you will not give up on me either. She dropped her hand. Tell me the plan, all of it. If I am to trust you past comfortable, you will trust me the same. No man's plan kept secret from the woman it is meant to save. We make it together or I go west tonight. That is my price. Fair was fair, I told her all of it. I won't lay the whole plan out here, because the doing of it is part 3's business and I'd not spoil it. But the shape of it was this. My land had a box canyon on the north end, a dead-end slot in the rocks that looked, to a man who didn't know it, like a passage through. I'd lost cattle in there my first year till I learned it. A stranger driving hard after a fleeing rider would take it for an escape route and follow. And once in, there was one way out, and that way could be closed by a single man above with the right position, which I had, having gathered up there every year to fix the fence a flash flood tore out. The plan was to make Deacon think Nolan was running, to give him the chase he wanted, and to run her or seem to straight into that slot where the ground itself, my own hard-learned ground, would do to his men what I could never do alone. It was a good plan. It was also a plan with a hole in it the size of a grave, and Nolan, being smarter than me, put her finger on it right off. To make them believe I run, she said, someone must be seen running, on a horse from a distance in my dress at the speed of true fear. They must chase her into your canyon believing she is the prize. She looked at me level. You have one horse fast enough, Juniper, and I cannot ride her into that slot and be the bait and also be above it closing the trap. I can be one, not both. And you do not know the ground of the trap as I do not know the ground. You know it, I do not, so. She said it without a tremor, laying it down like the wise thing she'd offered before. You be above at the closing. And I will be the one who runs. No, Eli. You'll be running toward a slot at a dead gallop on a horse that isn't yours, with a shoulder that's not healed. And if you misjudge it by 10 feet, you're dead on the rocks and it's all for nothing. No. And if you run it and mistime the closing, you are dead and I am taken, and then it is also for nothing, and I am back where I began except your blood is added to my nephew's. She stepped close again. We are 2 people, and it is a plan for 3. One of us must do the more dangerous thing. I have run for 4 days already with a hole in me. I know how to run afraid better than any living soul because I have done nothing else since the day in the rocks. Her voice dropped. Let me be good at the one thing I am good at. You have given me back my life. Do not take from me the chance to spend it on my own terms for closing the way I promised over his body. That promise is mine, Eli, not yours. You cannot keep it for me. You can only stand above the slot and give me the ground to keep it on. And I had no answer, because she was right, and being right didn't make it hurt less. And I understood then that the worst part of caring for somebody isn't the fear of losing them. It's that caring for them means you have to let them be who they are, even when who they are is a woman running headlong toward the thing you'd give your own life to spare her. We do it your way, I said, and it cost me more than any word ever had. She nodded once like a bargain struck. And then, because even the hardest hour has mercy folded into it if you look, she did a thing I'll carry to my own grave up on the rise with Sarah and the boy. She picked up the watch off the table, the dead thing with its hands forever at 10:04, and she pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. When it is done, she said, and we are both alive, you will wind this, and I will watch you do it, and we will both pretend the hands might move. Her eyes held mine. Give me that to run toward, Eli, not away from Deacon, toward the fool who winds a stopped watch. It is easier to run toward a thing than away from one. Give me the thing. I'll be there, I said. Above the slot, when you come through, I'll be there. I swear it on both those graves. I know, she said. That is why I can run. We had 2 days to make ready, by her read of Deacon's patience, and we used every hour of them, and I'll tell those hours and the running itself in what comes next. But I want to end this part where the true weight of it settled on me, because that's where it settled, and a story ought to end where its truth does. It settled on me the last night before, when the work was done and the traps were laid as well as two people could lay them, and we sat on the porch in the dark. The same porch she'd reached across with the last of her strength, what felt like a lifetime, and was really only a week ago. We didn't talk. She sat with her knees drawn up and her healed enough shoulder against the post, and I sat with the watch in my hand, not winding it, just holding it, and the stars came out hard and bright the way they do out here, and somewhere up on the ridge Deacon's men were watching us and thinking they had us, and for a little while I let myself not care. "Tell me about the boy," she said out of the dark. "Yours, the one on the rise." I hadn't spoken of him to a living soul in 6 years. I found I could speak of him to her. So I did his early coming, the small size of him, the way I dug his grave with my own hands in the frozen ground because there was no one else and no waiting for spring, and how Sarah had held him the 1 hour he lived, and had never once let go of the holding, even after, even into her own dying 2 years on. Nolan listened the way she did, completely, without reaching to fix it, a witness, giving me the thing I'd given her that first night in the dark. And when I was done, she said only, "Then you know," and I said, "Know what?" And she said, "That there is no wise thing. There is only what we can carry and what we cannot. The rest is talk." And we sat with that, two emptied-out people on a poor porch at the edge of everything, waiting for the day that would decide whether we'd be more emptied still or, against every sensible odd, less. Before we went in, she stopped in the doorway she'd fallen short of by 18 inches, and made now on her own 2 feet, and she looked back at me in the starlight. "If it goes wrong tomorrow," she said, "and I do not come through the slot." "You'll come through." "If I do not," her voice was steady as the ground. "Wind the watch anyway, every morning. Do not stop because of me. Do you hear? You did not stop for your Sarah. Do not stop for me. A man who stops winding is a man who has decided the stop thing is finally, truly stopped. Do not let me be the thing that makes you decide that." I couldn't answer. My throat had closed entire. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she went inside to sleep her last hours before the run, and I stood alone on the porch with a dead watch in my hand and a live fear in my chest. And up on the black ridge a torch flared once and died, Deacon telling me he was there, Deacon thinking he understood everything about the lonesome fella who ran the poor outfit. He understood nothing. He didn't understand that the fella had already lost everything a man can lose, and had come out the far side of it with just one thing left that he'd fight for, which was the refusal to be nobody near, one more time, while somebody reached. He didn't understand that the ground he meant to hunt on belonged, every rock and slot and dead-end draw of it, to the man he'd marked for a fool. And he didn't understand, couldn't have, not being the kind of man who'd know it to look at it, that somewhere in a poor dark house a woman was lying awake practicing, one more time, the running she was so terribly good at, and that this time, for the first time since the rocks, she was practicing running not away from something, but toward the slot, toward the fool above it with the watch in his hand, toward the morning where he'd wind it, and she'd watch, and they'd both pretend the hands. They came at first light, and there were 7. I counted them from the ridge above the north draw where I'd lain since long before dawn, flat on the cold rock with the shotgun and the rifle both, and my heart doing the thing it does. 7. Nolan had said enough to be sure, and Deacon had made himself sure, 4 more than the ridge had shown me that first friendly morning, riding down into my bottoms in the gray with the sureness of men who have done this before and been paid for it. Down at the house, Juniper was saddled and waiting. And on Juniper, when the light was just enough to be seen by, was a figure in a deerskin dress with black hair loose down its back, standing in my yard as if caught out in the open, as if the woman they wanted had lingered one fatal minute too long and been surprised by the dawn. Deacon saw her. I watched him see her. I watched his arm come up and point, watched the whole 7 of them break from a walk into a run all at once like a single animal scenting blood. And I watched the figure on Juniper wheel the horse and go north, away from them, hard, exactly the way we'd planned it, a rider fleeing for her life toward the rocks where a slot in the stone looked, to a stranger like the one rode out. The chase was on, and it was terrible to see even knowing it was ours. Because there is nothing in this world faster and more awful than 7 mounted men running down one, and every particle of me that had lived a quiet life screamed to break cover and do something, anything, and I made myself lie still and let it happen, because the plan was the plan, and the plan needed them all the way in. I have to tell you now the thing we did that I couldn't tell you before, because if I'd told you in part 2, you'd have watched the run knowing, and I wanted you to feel it the way Deacon felt it, which is fooled. The figure on Juniper was not Nolan. It was me. We'd argued it 3 more times in those 2 days, and each time Nolan had said she'd be the bait, and each time I'd let her win the argument out loud. And then, the last night, over the low fire, I'd laid out the truth of the thing plain and made her win a different argument instead. You know the ground of the slot, I'd said. You said it yourself, I know it, you don't. If I'm the bait and I mistime the run into the rocks, we lose everything. But if you're above the slot at the closing, and I've walked you over that ground a dozen times these 2 days till you know every foot of it in the dark, and I'd taken her up there and made her learn it, the loose scree, the one good boulder poised above the choke, the fuse line of it. Then the one who has to make the hardest judgment, the closing judgment, the one that has to be perfect, is the one who's a natural at perfect judgment under fear. And that's not me, Nolan. I panic. You don't. I've watched you come awake from dead sleep straight to ready. You be above. Let me be good at the one thing I'm good at, which is sitting a horse I've raised from a foal across ground I've ridden 10,000 times. Juniper won't run that draw for anybody but me anyhow. She'd fight a stranger's hands at the worst moment. She won't fight mine. And Nolan had looked at me a long, long while across the fire, and I'd watched her understand that I'd turned her own argument inside out and handed it back. Let me be good at the one thing I'm good at. And there was no answer to it because it was true, and she was too honest to pretend it wasn't just because it frightened her. You have used my own words against me, she'd said. I learned from a good teacher. If you die on those rocks in my dress, pretending to be me, then I die doing the one brave thing in a life of quiet ones, and you make it out west while they're busy with my body, and you keep your promise for closin' without me. Either way it works, Nolan. That's the beauty of it. It works whether I live or not. I'd wound the watch 3 turns in the firelight. I've already lost everything a man can lose once. There's a freedom in that Deacon can't touch. He's got 7 men because he thinks I've got something to protect. He's right, but he thinks the something is my life. It isn't. I gave up counting my life as the main thing 6 years ago up on that rise with a shovel. I'd looked at her. You be above the slot. When I come through with them on my tail, you close it. And you don't wait too long to be sure of me. You close it when it's right for the trap, not when it's right for me. You hear? If it comes down to closing it clean and losing me inside, you close it clean. That's an order, and it's the price of me being bait. Same price you set me. Fair's fair. She hadn't said yes. She'd looked at me the way she'd looked at the food that first time I made too much of, and then she'd reached across and wound the watch herself once, her hand over mine, and that had been the yes. So there I was at first light, in a dead woman's kind of dress with my own hair too short to fool anyone up close but long enough at a dawn distance, on a horse that would run this draw through fire, fleeing 7 men toward a slot in the rocks, and up above that slot, where I couldn't see her but knew she was, lay the woman they thought they were chasing, with a rifle and a poised boulder and the best nerve of any soul I ever met, waiting to bring my own ground down on the men who'd murdered a boy called Closin. Juniper ran like she was pouring downhill. I'd raised her and I'd never once asked her for everything she had, and that morning I asked, and she gave it, and it was the finest and most terrible ride of my life. The draw narrowed. The rock walls came up on either side, red and close, and behind me the 7 were strung out now, the best mounted pulling ahead, and I could hear them, the drum of it, the shouts, one high whoop of a man who thought the kill was coming. I didn't look back. Nolan had taught me that back when she was teaching me to lie. A man looks back at the thing he fears. Don't give them your fear to read. I gave them my back and Juniper's speed, and I ran the slot the way I'd run it in my sleep for 2 nights, and the walls swallowed us, and the light went red and narrow, and then the choke. The one place where the draw pinched to a single horse's width before it opened into the box beyond. The dead-end box that looked from the outside like a passage through. I put Juniper through the choke at a dead run, threaded that needle I'd threaded 100 times chasing strays, and burst into the box canyon beyond, and hauled her around hard against the far wall where the overhang would shelter us from what came next. And only then did I look back. The first 3 riders came through the choke behind me, hard, sure, and I saw the moment the front one understood. Saw his head come up as the walls closed, and there was no passage, only a bowl of rock with one narrow door, and that door already behind him, and me sitting a blown horse against the far wall in a dress, turning to face him, a man where a woman should be. Deacon's voice from back in the choke roared something. Understanding, fury, the word trap maybe torn up by echoes. And above the choke, where the one good boulder hung poised at the top of the loose scree, a woman rose up against the brightening sky with a fence rail lever in her hands, and I saw her small and certain and terrible against the light, and I saw her set the rail and throw her whole healed-enough body against it, and I heard the sound the mountain makes when you've spent 2 days quietly loosening its grip on a stone the size of a wagon. The choke came down. I'll not pretend I saw it clean. There was dust, a roar that I felt in my chest more than heard, Juniper screaming and fighting my hands, rock coming off the walls in a way we hadn't fully planned for, more of it than I'd reckoned, the whole top of the choke shrugging down into the gap. When it settled, there was a wall of broken stone where the door had been, and on my side of it, sealed in the box with me, were the 3 riders who'd come through first. 3, not 7. The trap had done exactly what we'd built it to do, split the pack, seal the leaders in the killing bowl, while the rest outside where Deacon was. 3 men against 1, which sounds bad, and would have been, except the 3 were horsed in a rock bowl with no room to run and no way out. And I was against the overhang with 2 long guns, and the high cold clarity that comes down on a man sometimes when the thinking finally stops, and there's only the doing. I want to tell you I felt brave. I felt nothing at all, that's the truth of it. The fear had been so big for so long that when the moment came it went away entire, the way a sound too loud turns into silence. And I was just a man doing a thing, watching himself do it. 2 of the 3 were the hired hard ones. They came off their horses shooting, and rock chips stung my face, and I fired the shotgun into the near one and the rifle at the far, and I don't like to say more about that part than I have to. It was quick. It was ugly. It was them or Nolan, them or the promise, them or a boy called Closen going unanswered forever, and I'd made my peace with the arithmetic 2 nights before at the fire. When it was done, the 2 hard men were down and not getting up, and the box canyon rang with the awful after-silence of gunfire in stone, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely thumb fresh shells. And the 3rd rider sat his horse and had not fired. The boy, the raw-faced one from the mercantile, the one who did not shoot. He'd come through the choke 3rd, and in the dust and the rockfall he'd got turned around, and now he sat his spooked horse against the near wall with his rifle in his hands and not raised, staring at me, at the 2 dead men, at the wall of stone that had sealed us in. And his young peeling face was doing the thing I'd seen it start to do in the mercantile. The drowning thing. The thing a man's face does when the wrongness of his whole road catches up to him all at once. Don't, I said. My rifle was on him. At that range I wouldn't miss, and he knew it. Set it down. He didn't set it down. He didn't raise it either. He just held it shaking, and he said in a voice younger than his years, "You're a man, you're not her. You're a man in her dress." Like the world had come apart, and this was the crack that had done it. I am. Where is she? Not a demand. That plea again, the one from the mercantile, the one that wanted an answer that would let him sleep. Somewhere you'll never find her, I said. Somewhere your Deacon will never collect on. It's over, son. That part's over. Now set the gun down and you get to ride out of here when the rest dig through and you never come back to this country, and maybe you spend the rest of your life making up for a boy you watched run. Or raise it and I put you down with the other 2, and you die for Deacon's $50 in a hole in the rocks. That's the whole choice. I'll give you the time it takes me to say I mean it. I mean it. And here is the thing I have carried since, the thing I turn over at night like a stone in my pocket. The thing Nolan was right about, and I was wrong about, and neither of us could have known which until this exact red morning in the rock. He raised the rifle. Not at me, that's what I have to tell you, and it's why the stone won't leave my pocket. He didn't raise it at me. In the half-second I had, in the drowning on his face, I read it as coming up at me, and I fired. Because I'd sworn on 2 graves to come through the slot and be above it and keep a promise. And a man with a rifle coming up is a man you fire on. That's the law of it, that's survival, that's the arithmetic. And only when he was down, did I see that the barrel had been swinging past me, up and past, toward the top of the choke wall. Toward Nolan, standing up there against the sky where she'd risen to see if I lived. He'd been raising it at her. Or he'd been raising it to throw it down. To surrender it up and over the way, a man casts away a thing he can't hold anymore. And my fear had read murder into a boy laying down his arms. I will never know. That's the whole horror and the whole mercy of it braided together, and I will never, ever untangle them. I've gone over it 10,000 times, and the half-second won't give up its secret. He raised a rifle. It was going somewhere that wasn't me, I fired. He died. And whether I killed a man in the last act of choosing Deacon's murder or killed a boy in the first act of choosing to be done with it forever, is a thing sealed up in that box canyon with the dust, and God has not seen fit to tell me, and I have stopped asking, because the asking was eating me alive and Nolan made me stop. But that comes after. In the moment I only knew he was down, and the box was silent, and I was alive, and up on the wall a woman I'd have died for was still standing. It took Deacon and the other 2 hours to dig through, and by then we were gone. That was the plan too. The choke sealed both ways, and the box canyon had a second way out that no stranger would find. A goat track up the back wall that I'd used for years. Too narrow and hidden for a mounted man, but fine for 2 people on foot leading a horse who trusted them. Nolan came down off the top of the choke by the way we'd scouted, and met me at the goat track, and we didn't speak. There wasn't time and there weren't words. We just climbed. Her and me and Juniper picking her careful way, up and out, and over the back of the ridge, while below us Deacon's men clawed at a wall of stone to reach a bowl that held 3 dead men and a mystery in a torn dress. We were miles gone before either of us said anything. We'd come down the far side into country I knew and Deacon didn't, and we'd put a hard river crossing between us and the box. And only when the sun was high and Juniper needed rest did we stop, in a cottonwood hollow by the water, and sit, and finally look at each other in the flat light of a thing survived. "You are alive," she said, like she was confirming it for the record. "Appears so. You were the bait." Her voice had something in it I couldn't name. "You turned my own words on me and you were the bait, and I was above, and I closed the choke not knowing if you had cleared it. I closed it when it was right for the trap, as you ordered." Her jaw worked. "I closed it with you inside and 3 men, and I did not wait to be sure of you, because you made me swear I would not, and I have never in my life done a harder thing than throw that rail while you were still in the rocks." She looked at me. "Do not ever ask me to do such a thing again." "I won't." I found I was shaking again, now that it was safe to. "Nolan, the boy, the young one." I saw her face closed. "From above, I saw him raise the rifle and I saw you fire." "He wasn't," my voice broke on it. "I don't know if he was raising it at you or throwing it down. I fired before I knew. I've killed men before this week that had it coming, and I'll sleep on those. But that one I don't know, and the not knowing." She reached over and put her 2 fingers against the side of my face. The way she had that night in the house, sure, the way you touch a thing to know it's real. "Listen to me," she said. "I told you he had spent his kindness. I was wrong, perhaps. Perhaps he was buying it back in that last half-second. Perhaps not. Here is the thing, Eli, and you will take it from me because I am the one whose nephew he watched run, and I have the right to say it, and you do not." Her eyes held mine and did not let go. "It does not matter what he meant. It matters what you could know. You could know a rifle came up in the hands of a man who rode 4 days to take my body for money. You could not know his heart in half a second. No man could. You fired on what you could know. That is not murder. That is the price of the country we are in, and he set that price himself the day he did not ride away from Deacon after he would not shoot. He had years to ride away. He had that morning in your mercantile to ride away. He rode into your canyon instead with a rifle for money, chasing me." Her voice was iron and grief together. "Maybe he changed his mind in the last half-second. If he did, then he died a better man than he lived, and that is his to carry to whatever waits, not yours. You do not get to keep his half-second, Eli. It is not yours. Set it down." I couldn't set it down. Not then, maybe not ever entire. But she'd given me the shape of a way to hold it that didn't burn my hands off, and that was more than I'd had, and I have used it 10,000 nights since. You fired on what you could know. It doesn't make it clean. Nothing makes it clean. But it lets a man keep living, and I've come to think that letting a man keep living while still making him carry the true weight is the most honest mercy there is. Nolan dealt in that mercy. It was the only kind her life had left her able to make. We stayed together 11 days. I'll not stretch it into more than it was, because it wasn't a story with a wedding at the end, and I won't insult it by pretending. We rode north and west, careful into higher country, and I got her to within a day of where her people had scattered after the killing. A band up in the pines that would take her in and hide her, and help her carry the promise the rest of the way, whatever the rest of the way turned out to be. 11 days on the trail, sleeping under cottonwoods and then under pines, sharing the last of my flour and the fish she taught me to take from cold streams with my hands, and talking, finally, the way 2 emptied people talk when they've stopped being afraid the other one will use the empty places against them. She told me about closin', not the running, the living. How fast he was, and how it made him unbearable, and how she'd loved him unbearably. How her brother had laughed like a rockfall. How her people had been whole once and were scattered now, and how the promise she'd made over the boy's body wasn't only about Deacon. Deacon was one man, and men like him were endless, but about not letting the scattered stay scattered, about carrying enough of what they'd been to seed it somewhere new. That was the promise. Deacon was just the first debt on a long ledger, and I'd helped her collect it, and she was grateful, but she wasn't done. She'd never be done. The promise was the length of her whole remaining life. And I told her about Sarah and the boy and 6 years of winding a dead watch, and how she'd walked up my porch steps and reached across 18 inches and started my life over against my will, and I thanked her for it, and she said don't, and I said I'll thank you if I want to. I learned stubbornness from a good teacher, and she laughed, the first true full laugh I ever got from her, out loud in the pines, and it was worth every terror of that week, and I'd pay it all again to hear it. On the 11th evening we camped in sight of the smoke of her people's fires, a day off, and we both knew it was the last night because I couldn't go in among them. A white rancher was a danger to a hidden band, and she wouldn't risk them, and I wouldn't ask her to, and my own place with its 2 graves and its scattered cattle and its bank paper was 300 miles behind me, and still, somehow mine, still needing tending, still the shape my life was cut to. We didn't pretend otherwise. That was the gift of 2 honest people. We didn't waste the last night on a lie about a different ending. She took the watch out of my vest. She'd learned where I kept it. And she wound it 3 turns in the pine dark, her hand steady, and held it up to her ear the way I'd caught her doing more than once on the trail, listening for the tick that never came. "Still stopped," she said. "Always is." 4 minutes past 10. She turned the dead face in the firelight. Forever 4 minutes past 10. She looked at me across the fire, and there was the thing in her face that surprise makes room for, grown now into something with no name I'll cheapen by trying to give it one. "You told me a man cannot fix a thing already stopped, and you wind it anyway. I did not understand it that first night. I thought it a widower's foolishness." She pressed the watch back into my palm and closed my fingers over it, the way she had before, the way that meant yes and goodbye and things there aren't words for. "I understand it now. You do not wind it to make the hands move. You wind it to say you have not agreed the thing is over. Every morning you refuse to agree." Her voice went low. "That is what you did on your porch. You refused to agree I was over. That is what I will do with my people every day, for all the days, refuse to agree that we are over, though everything says we are." She stood. "So, when you are 300 miles from here at your 2 graves, winding your stopped watch in the gray morning, know that far off in the pines, a woman is doing the same thing with her whole life. Winding a stopped people, refusing to agree." She looked down at me. "We will never see each other again, Eli Chrome, you know this." "I know it. Wind the watch anyway." "Every morning," I said. "I swear it, on both those graves and on a boy named Closen." She nodded once the bargain struck. And in the gray of the next dawn she was gone. She'd slipped away in the last dark so neither of us would have to do the thing of watching the other grow small. And I woke to a cold camp and 1 horse and a folded square of deerskin she'd left on my saddle. And inside it, worked in careful sinew, a small thing she must have made on the trail in the hours I slept. It was a watch, a little disc of hammered tin she'd cut and worked, with hands scratched into its face. And the hands she'd scratched pointed to 4 minutes past 10. I sat in that cold camp a long time with a real dead watch in one hand and a made one in the other. Both of them stopped forever at the same hour. And I did the only thing there was to do, the thing I'd sworn. I wound the real one 3 turns. Then I turned Juniper south, toward 300 miles of country and 2 graves and a poor place that needed me, and I did not look back, because a woman had taught me you don't give the thing you fear your back to read. And what I feared that gray morning wasn't any man. It was how much I wanted to turn around. So I gave the pines my back and I rode, and the sun came up hard and gold the way it does out here where there's nothing to argue with it. And somewhere behind me in that light, a woman was winding a whole people against the odds, refusing to agree they were over. I've wound the watch every morning since. It's been 4 years. The hands have never moved, 4 minutes past 10 through everything. But I'll tell you a thing I've never told anyone, and then I'll stop, because some things you say once and then let lie.